Everyone. So I'm Father Hugh. For my sins, I'm a mission area leader, which is basically head of the team of priests and clergy for Dyffryn Clwyd mission area, which is 12 churches in and around the town of Dyffryn in northeast Wales. I've been in post here for about two and a half years. So I was inducted on the 1st of March 2020, a good day for any Welshman to start a parish on St. David's Day. I had about 2 Sundays in the parish, and then in the 3rd week we went into our first national lockdown with COVID and the start of the pandemic. So not the easiest way to start. So the story I'm going to share with you is what's basically happened in one of our churches during the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic as we are now. So it's a journey of just over sort of 2 years or so in the church here. If you do want to come and visit or find out exactly where we are, it's Llanbedr, Dyffryn Clwyd, or Llanbedr DC. If you just put Llanbedr into Google Maps, then you end up over by Harlech, which is a different one entirely. So that DC really is crucial. I'm just going to try and share my screen if I can. Sorry, take you back to the start. So Llanbedr, Dyffryn Clwyd, the church here is, for us, it's a new build. It's a Victorian 1864 or thereabouts. Every other church in our mission area has its foundation back in the age of the saints, somewhere between the 5th and 7th century. So for us, a new build really is, only 150 odd years old. It's no time at all for the story of faith in this place. It's a usual small village. Population about 500 or 600. It's got a pub, it's got a village hall, and the church here. The church is a standard Victorian build, full of pews, built in the Oxford movement sort of style. No toilet, does have running water, churchyard surrounding it. So if we think about when that first sort of lockdown happened, from the minute it started, we went, right, every day we are going to Facebook live stream a mass. We're going to do it at a different one of our 12 churches and let the community know that we are praying for them. And even though the doors are locked, worship continues. The sacrifice of the mass is still offered. And it's important that that's done for those people, whether or not they can be there or not. But what we noticed was people really didn't want to sit there just staring at a screen. They wanted to go somewhere. They wanted to be part of something and do something. So in Llanbedr, there is the ruins of the old church, which is just slightly out of the village, up a hill, overlooking the Vale of Clwyd. And we noticed that while the church had a congregation there of about 10 people, so I forgot to say the finances, basically they had about 2 years left in the bank, and then they'd run out of money basically. But within the village, people were suddenly visiting the old church because they wanted somewhere to go. They didn't use words like religion or faith or God, but they knew they had to go somewhere and that they were searching for something to help them through what we were all going through with COVID and lockdowns, that anxiety, that concern, that not knowing where any of this was going to lead. So while people were stopping at the old church, we couldn't obviously go up to them and have any conversations with them. So what could we do? Well, when I went up there for a walk, I found the roof timbers around the back of the old church, and a couple of them would actually fit together to make a cross. So we banged a few nails in and we made what we called the COVID cross. This was up there. So a lot of our streaming actually started coming from here as we were traveling through Lent and towards Holy Week. This became the focus for our devotions and our prayers as we went through that pandemic. But as people were getting outside and discovering the places that they lived in for what seemed like the first time, really noticing where they lived and the beauty of creation and gardening. So we decided for Maundy Thursday we would create that Garden of Gethsemane and live stream from there. So we actually, inside the church, brought all the pot plants in and we created that Garden of Gethsemane. And on that Maundy Thursday, we held that watch from 6 till midnight, live streamed it all. And people were sending sort of prayer requests, and we were lighting candles for them. And it was just there on their screens, the smoke drifting across the garden as that watch in the garden. Now, I'd only just started when we went to lockdown, so I had no idea who people were. But I was being told that actually these people who were watching and were sending their prayer requests, they'd never seen them before in church. They were not Christians. They certainly weren't churchgoers. But they wanted something. But what they wanted more than just a few hours on a screen where they could go, could you pray for this and could you pray for that? Could you say something or speak something into my worry and anxiety? They wanted somewhere that they could go themselves in their own time and spend their own time thinking and looking for these answers for questions themselves, not just viewing it on a screen. So for Easter Sunday, we were back outside and the Easter Vigil and that morning dawn service was back up on the hill, and we left the sheet up there for the whole of Eastertide, draped over our COVID cross. People were getting outside, people wanting to do something. Now, I don't know about you guys and how you managed through COVID, but I hate being locked down inside. I cannot just sit on a sofa. I start climbing the walls if I'm stuck inside for too long. But when I went out into the rectory garden, that was my view. It was horrible. I couldn't stand it. It was closed in. It was hemmed in by these tall hedges on each side. So boredom and frustration of being inside, I chainsawed it all down. Suddenly, I had a view. Once more, as people were outside and walking, the circuit around Llanbedr took them not only to the old church, but actually then came back round through the churchyard and back into the village. So as I was out in the garden hacking, I saw quite a lot of people, and we were able to have some of those conversations that they were dying to have with somebody. But the trouble was, the view as I looked out and started trying to do my own garden was like that. It's all right, but it's a churchyard. It's rather overgrown. It might be a place where we bury the dead, but it doesn't have to be a dead place. So we started clearing up, getting my kids involved. And I have to say, if you want children involved in church, give them industrial machinery with lots of whirring blades. They absolutely love it. And we started clearing. So an avenue of cherry trees with an Irish yew, it's all right. But let's start hacking it back a bit. Let's make the place look like somebody is looking after it. And we started hacking it back and lifting things up. And as we did that, and people were walking by and going, what are you doing? Well, this is what we're doing. Why? Because we want the place to be alive. We want it to be somewhere for you to come when you need that space. Is there anything I can do to help? Of course there is. Have you got a tractor and trailer, mate? Brilliant. Bring it down. You can help us cart some of the rubbish away. The farmers started getting involved and clearing the rubbish for us, and it was great. But the more we cleared, the more we looked around, the more we found needed cutting. So that was just outside the front of the church. Now, if your first sight when you're walking up to the church is that, which is supposed to be a yew tree, it's not an inspiring sight. It doesn't make you think here is somewhere that's cared for. So chop it away. Suddenly you can see the church when you're walking up rather than a giant bush swallowing graves. But it gives us that big space that you can see there where the grass isn't growing because the sunlight never reached it through the yew tree that had grown out that far. So what do you do with it? Do you just leave it and you'll get some of those pioneer species, the weeds and the willow herbs and the brambles will start coming up? Do you turn it over and just stick some grass seed down? Or do you go, there's some bare soil, let's make a garden? So again, just using wood chip from the stuff we've cleared, using the logs to make the borders, get a bit of slate chippings. We're in Wales, it's easy to get slate chippings here. And all the flowers and plants donated by people, because people were out there gardening during pandemic. So as they were splitting plants, we said, give us your spares. Some people grow things on from seeds. They got leftovers, they handed them over. And before long, we had our Easter garden. And the way the branches actually sort of came off where we chopped, created that little cave. We found that giant rock when we were clearing. And that's the tomb that's now closed on Good Friday for us and found open on Easter morning. The rest of the time, I happen to have a statue of Mary knocking around. It's a little grotto for the Virgin Mary. And again, it's another space that people can enjoy. It's the first thing you see as you're coming up the drive. And people are able to see that the place is cared for. But every time we looked, we see yew trees. So what can you do other than clear them? So you get the saw out, you get the kids involved again, and you have it cleared. And then you're left with another space. And you go, what do we do with this? Well, we found actually there were a bunch of teenagers that had started hanging around in the churchyard because there was nowhere else to go and nothing much else for them to do. So rather than just have them hanging around, messing about, making a nuisance, we asked them, do you want to do something to help? Can you give us a chuck with this? And we got them involved. We made them a labyrinth. We managed to get the community council to chuck us a bit of money. We bought a load of lavender plants, a bit more slate chippings, and before you know it, you've got a nice labyrinth. And for the teenagers to be able to talk to them, well, what is this that we've created? Well, this is where whenever you've got any questions, worries, what have you, you just bring them to mind and you just follow the path slowly, talking with God about whatever is going on, and then spend some time sitting in the middle, just listening to his answer. And these days, as I look out from my garden, there isn't a day go by where I don't see 2 or 3 people actually coming and walking that labyrinth. But as we cleared all this and the light finally got down to the soil, when the next spring came, suddenly things started growing. We didn't plant these, they just turned up. The seeds were always there, lying dormant, just waiting for light to get in. Suddenly, the churchyard is a beautiful place. There is a guy in the village who does keep joshing me. He's a good old lad in his 80s who's got a strum who's the weeds are growing everywhere. But what is a weed other than a flower growing in the wrong place? I've managed to stop him cutting them so far. So as we saw all these flowers coming, and suddenly this place becomes beautiful and people want to spend time there, we got the school over, because the schools at this point were back with COVID, but they were worried about the ventilation and the spread of COVID within the school environment. So any excuse they had to get outside and do something, they jumped at it. So we brought them over, we got them planting. And again, the great thing, getting the kids involved, well, they want to show their parents and their grandparents, their uncles, their aunties, their cousins, what they've been doing. And because they're planting flower bulbs, once they start to grow, you can go into the school and say, hey, that stuff that you planted, it's flowering now, come and have a look. And again, they want to bring their parents, their grandparents, their cousins, aunties and uncles. And suddenly the place is busier. People want to spend time there and they feel like it's theirs. It's no longer just a place where you bury the dead. It might be a churchyard, but it's a living place that people want to spend time in. So you might see with the logs there, we created that as the designated sort of wildflower area that we didn't cut. Now, I know some people might think wildflower area, that's a great savings you can make because you don't cut it. You still have to cut it. You only do it once a year, but it's a much bigger job because it's had a year's worth of growth. You've also got to rake it up and clear it away, because wildflowers prefer poor soil quality, so you don't want that stuff rotting back down and adding nutrients. You want to keep it as bare as possible to encourage the wildflowers. So you could, you know, ask the guy who normally cuts the grass how much for doing this and pay extra. You could get your strimmer out and spend your money on petrol and adding to your carbon footprint, or you can go green. Get your scythe out. And again, if you want kids involved, tell them they can have sharp blades and wave them around. The great thing about a scythe is it's on a long stick, so it's actually very, very difficult to chop your own legs off with it. So it's quite good in that respect. You just got to make sure nobody else is nearby when they've got it. So now we get the grass cut once a year. We get free labour by turning it into a novelty of come and have a go at scything. It's amazing the people who'd love to have a go. So it gets cut for free and it becomes a community event. You get your tea, your coffee, your cake on the go. People come along, have a laugh and have a go at scything. We got 2 or 3 scythes. We asked people to come and have a go. But as we did, we kept noticing more and more spaces. So this is at the back end of the churchyard, this place completely overgrown. I had a good clear out again. Now, the churchyard itself has been overgrown for so long, the congregation didn't realise they had a shed. We did manage to, you know, unrust the lock and find the key eventually. There wasn't any treasure inside, just spiders. And I'm arachnophobic, so I still don't go in there. But imagine not knowing you have a shed in your own churchyard. It's a beggared belief to discover these things completely overgrown. But again, we're left with this clear space. What are we going to do with it? So with a bit of imagination, we look at it and we think, what can we do? We don't want to just stick more graves in here and fill it up. What can we create? So at the same time as this was sort of being cleared, up at the old church, if you remember that's actually under the care of the representative body, as a sort of closed place with the roof taken off. They'd had a tree survey done. We had to fell a quite large sycamore that had grown dangerous there. So we had that cleared. But rather than just chip up the branches and firewood for the logs, we said, well, why don't we have it slabbed up, make some decent sort of 2-inch slabs, planks out of it. So we paid a couple £100 to have a local sawmill slab it up. Got a dehumidifier in the garage with a fan, turned that into a kiln, 2 or 3 months to dry it all out. And thanks to YouTube, one of my lockdown projects was learning how to pour epoxy resin. Again, look on YouTube, there's some wonderful things out there. So we created this river table, which became an outdoor altar. And suddenly we have an outdoor worship space at a time when we couldn't gather inside. It's not just there for us to be able to do services, it's there all the time. So these people who are walking around and suddenly noticing this is a good place to stop now have somewhere to come and sit, watch the wildflowers, listen to the birds sing, and discover a creator through his creation. But again, as I said at the beginning, I get bored very, very easily. So I decided to play around and make another one, which we then walked through the village and up to the old church. It's amazing the conversations you can have with people when you start walking through the village, carrying some legs and a giant river tabletop. Where are you going with that? What are you doing? Well, we're going up to the old church and it's going to have an altar again. So this is actually an Ascension Day service where that little mound overlooking the Vale of Clwyd became our Mount Olivet. We couldn't sing inside, but we could still have a sung mass outside in God's creation, beautiful setting. So we started using that space. We continued to develop that outdoor space. So we called it Capel Beno, Beno being Welsh saints, I think 6th century. He was actually over towards Clwyd, but is very, very intertwined with nature, a lot of his stories. So he's the patron saint of cattle and cattle farmers, because when calves are born, they sometimes have a little mark on their ear, which is known as Ffynnon Beno, certainly around Gwynedd and northwest Wales. And they were marked as special as Beno's cattle. And there's stories of the curlew sort of flying down and rescuing his book of sermons when they fell in the Menai Straits one day. So very interlinked with nature. We also dug a little hole, stuck some rocks around it. Suddenly we got a fire pit. I think every churchyard should have a fire pit. You will have to be prepared to get some good-natured joshing about, oh, you're branching out into cremations now, are you, Vicar? And those kind of things. And we started Wild Church, a way of gathering around the fire pit. Once you've got a fire pit, you can start cooking, you can gather around the flames, and you can share food. So that was us making some drop scones. And I think there's still something very, very central to our being, built into our core, remembering our earliest ancestors who would have gathered around the fire for warmth, for security, for safety. And it's there they told stories for entertainment, for knowing who they were and what they were about. And that's how community really formed, was around the fire. And I think there's still something deep in our heart that when we see a fire and we start to gather and we tell stories, that we can start becoming community together. And don't forget, that's a lot of what Jesus did. He told stories to make some points and to bring people to faith. And that's, again, what you can do using a bit of fire. It's not on a beach. We're not doing char grilled, but Jesus is still very much there. And it's through the Wild Church we're able to do various sort of activities, and it's them that now mostly sort of look after that churchyard and develop it, putting new flower beds in. They've put up bird boxes. They in the spring create with biodegradable paper cups, collect dog fur from home and bits of straw and things like that, so that when things come out of hibernation, they've got nesting material. And as they discover that creation, it's not that big a leap for them to then start thinking of a creator and introducing them to God and then introducing them to Christ. But if it's good during the day, it also means we can use it at night. So simple garden lamps, oil lamps, and the fire pit going. And if you remember one of the Christmases, everything was going fine, and then the Omicron came and suddenly we were locked down again here in Wales and we couldn't gather inside. We could still have the Christingle service outside, be together, be community, sing the carols and tell the stories. So we had Christingle and carols as a community, some mulled wine heated over the fire, and still able to do it. And it's just such a beautiful feeling being outdoors by lamplight with fire together on a Christmas Eve. We continued to develop. I mean, you might see some of these benches there are basically some of these slabs of wood nailed to a couple of logs. Not very stable. We wanted some better seats. So again, you look on YouTube, you head down Hugh Gray's, you find some pallets. Suddenly YouTube will show you how to put these together, create some chairs, and some very comfortable chairs. And we continue to gather and develop that space. And you can do all sorts of things with these people who would never have come to a church, to that normal service that you have on a Sunday morning with only a few people. So we're able to do things. We did Corpus Christi. So we brought the cider press down, we crushed some grapes, made some grape juice. We didn't have 6 months to stick it in the airing cupboard and make it alcoholic, unfortunately. So we had communion with the grape juice. The bread, don't worry, we didn't use hot dogs for the bread for our Eucharist, but simple bread dough, wrap it around a stick, bake it over a fire, you got bread. The leftover bread after you've had the Eucharist, you then wrap around a hot dog sausage and cook over the fire. The advantage of frankfurters and hot dog sausages is they don't need to be cooked through, so you don't need to worry about killing anyone off with dodgily cooked sausages. Stick them over a stick, cook them like that. Sharing food, being a community. But the greatest missional thing that I've discovered from a fire pit, I think they were first made in America, is a s'more. You toast your marshmallow and then 2 chocolate biscuits sandwiched around the marshmallow, chocolate on the inside, melts over the marshmallow, and it's gorgeous. And before you start thinking that's great for their kids who just sort of like these sweet things, the adults love them too. S'mores should be compulsory for every church service, I think. Absolutely gorgeous. But again, it was great during the day being able to gather, so a Saturday afternoon, we always did the Wild Church. But at night, the place really became special. So once a month on a Friday night, we have a teenage youth group, Teens Go Wild. You do have to be a bit careful with these names. I did get a few phone calls of, what are the teenagers going wild in the churchyard? Are they going to knock over? What are they going to do to my parents' grave? Calm them down, say wild nature, not wild going mental. People do get over it and used to it eventually. So this was actually last night. We held our monthly Teens Go Wild. So that's what our Capalbano looks like at the moment, what it looked like last night. We had about 15 teenagers there. We had various sort of fun and games. We were thinking about sort of wilderness and things like that, and how God can guide you through the wilderness. So a scavenger hunts by torchlight, and blindfolded being led along a sort of wonky path and things like that, and be able to talk to them and link it to these Bible stories of these wilderness years of the people of God, of how they didn't know where they were going and they felt lost, but God always provided. He gave them streams in the desert to quench their thirst. He provided the food, the manna from the sky. He saw them through and guided them and sustained them. And for these teenagers, don't forget, not having gone through just a plague, they're also now facing war in Europe. They're looking at the ecological disaster and the climate crisis. These people are wondering if there is a future worth bothering in, and it is causing anxiety in our young people. To be able to gather them outside around the fire pit and have some fun and games, and give them some tools of how God can help guide them to trust and have faith, but also to act and do something about these things. It helps them not just with those large worldwide problems that we're facing, but also the personal journeys and troubles that they have of just being teenagers. It's not easy being a teenager. We've also, since then, because the adults started complaining, oh, the young people get together around the fire, what about us? So once a month we have tales around the fireside. We've now got a pizza oven that goes over the fire. We have a few, crack open some of the fruit ciders, have a couple of cans, sit around the fire, share some pizza, and they come and they talk. You know, I generally start, if nobody's got anything, with some of the tales of the ancient Welsh saints, the wild sort of stories and legends attached to them. But they soon start talking about what's going on in their lives and what they're searching for. And I get to just hang around, listen, wear the dog collar and occasionally go, so have you thought about what God might say into that situation? Have you thought about how faith might help you through that? Have you tried praying? And it's amazing the conversations that these people who are coming are not churchgoers. They're not of faith, but they're asking questions. And I think that's true generally of people across society. But what they're not doing is turning up to church to find the answers that we have to give. This gives them a safe environment, something a bit quirky for them to come along and do, and it opens them up. And we have those questions. One of the advantages, if you remember, they planted that lavender around the labyrinth, is being able to harvest the lavender and some roses that have been planted. So one of the wild churches, Bryant, holding here a little jar. We ordered some base oil. I think that's almond oil that we've used as a base. That's it now, stooping with roses and lavender. So as part of our sort of financial thing, we're soon going to be selling sacred scented oils from the church. So you'll be able to come and get a pot of massage oil made from natural things grown in the churchyard. And it's just one more way of being able to show people, actually, you can grow this stuff in this garden. You can make use of it yourself. God gives and gives all these things if we make use of it. When we have community events now, we can get the African drums out and have a drumming circle, but people want to be in this space. It's a living space. So this church that was only really in use for an hour on a Sunday, and then it was only 10 or 11 people, and we got through the service, we might enjoy it, but it can be hard work some Sundays when you're just going through the motions. Suddenly, people want to be here and they want to come. So we can have a good sort of couple hundred people come to a community events, and we have them all the time throughout the year, because the great thing about being outside is every season has its beauty and its different things in flower. So we've had barbecues, we get the badminton set out on the grass, and people come and play badminton. And this place that's normally been associated with death and dying is suddenly a living space. And being in a churchyard with gravestones around really helps people with some rootedness. Now, this place in Wales, there's quite a lot of people who've come over the border and moved in, and they don't have that rootedness that is certainly built into the Welsh people. I think Northern England's quite similar, isn't it? There's a certain rootedness in community and village life. or being able to turn around people, go, oh, you never met Mrs. Evans, is it? That's her grave over there. This is who she was. She lived in the old post office. And people are learning the story of their own community because they're hanging around with those stones that contain the story of how this village has become what it is. And people want to be there, whether they believe and come on a Sunday. They suddenly see the church not as a burden to be financed and hand the hat round again, otherwise we'll close. It's a place that gives life to the community and brings people together, and they give and they want to sustain the place. As people were wandering around and starting to enjoy the space, one of the things we did start under lockdown was my wife started baking, and we sell cakes and started an honesty box out of the porch. When we were allowed to open the doors again, people still bought their cakes from the porch, and they'd sit around the churchyard and enjoy the space, but we couldn't tempt them inside somehow. So we thought, how do we get them inside? One of the locals plays a lot of golf, got chatting with the guy who provides the coffee machines for them, Majestic Coffee. It took a bit of faith for the congregation with their limited finances to go, we will spend £1,000 on a refurbished coffee machine. Now, this machine, there's just a 5-gallon pot of water underneath it, and it's supplied by a pump, so all you need is a plug socket, and away you go. Now, you're all Manchester, you're probably sophisticated people, but we'd never heard of a mochaccino, a creamy hot chocolate with a shot of coffee in it. It's absolutely fantastic. And people started coming in, getting their coffee, getting their cake. So again, this church that gathered once a week for an hour suddenly is busy throughout the week. And we actually take about £300 a month now through donations and through the coffee and cakes and things being sold there. And people come in. We also took a punt because we got all this contact with the young people through the school, through the Wild Church, and so on. So we, as a missionary across the 12, we actually employed now somebody on 6 hours a week as director of music. And this was our first cohort of half a dozen or so young people who joined our song school, which was just about getting them in, helping with mental health, helping them get together and just learn that lifelong joy of singing. We now have about a dozen kids, and once a month they give us a choral mass. That congregation of 10 or 11 is now 20, closer to 30 when we do the choral stuff. And it's thriving and it's bubbling. We have a Eucharist every day of the week apart from Monday, because that's my day off. We've got the Celtic Eucharist on a Tuesday evening. The song school's in from 3:30, then a Celtic Eucharist, and then afterwards we've got a community choir. Again, people come in. Okay, we probably start the community choir so we could go to the pub afterwards and have a pint. But we've got 15, 20 adults who, again, no association with church, singing a mixture of secular and hymns. But suddenly being in a church building and that lifting of the heart that only singing in a community can bring, start asking what the words of that hymn mean. And it's starting to mean something. And 2 or 3 of that community choir now give us a boost with the Sunday choir and help with the kids. And they're getting involved and they're wanting to come back, give things back and coming to faith. So this church that if we'd just done what we'd always done, would probably be closed this year, is now turning a profit, possibly only about 1,000 a year, this 1,000 profit this year, but it's also nowhere near closure. There's 3 or 4 people at every single mass, Tuesday to Friday. The Tuesday evening is bigger with about a dozen. And then we've got the Sundays growing 20 and continuing to grow. And we've got a future. If you want to know more about any of this or come and see some of it in action, then next Saturday, the diocese is actually holding its first Eco Festival. This is what's going to be going on. The pub does really good food, is worth visiting, but you're going to have coffee and cake around the place. There's the labyrinth. We're going to have bushcrafts, drumming workshops, various stalls. So we've got Friends of the Earth coming, and we're suddenly liaising. The church is not sidelined here, but we're actually in the middle of all these organizations going, we're part of this conversation of getting people involved in climate action. And then around the fire pit throughout the day, we'll be running various tasters of wild church, mindfulness walks, Celtic outdoor Eucharists and things like that, so people can come and see what goes on in action and hopefully take it back to their own churches. I think we're only about an hour or so from Manchester. If you want to pop over, more than welcome. But I think with all this environmental stuff, we never set out to be environmental or to do eco church or anything else. We sort of fell into it by accident. The Holy Spirit moved and all we could do was get out the way and let it actually happen. And it's all developed organically. Just out of curiosity, I sat down with the church warden and we created, we went through the checklist and we're a silver award for eco church. If we really want to do eco stuff, I think the key, I know me as vicar, when I get yet another thing from the diocese, we got to do this, we got to do that, oh, we've got to be carbon neutral now. All I want to do is grow the church, balance the books and keep open. That's a lot of what we're trying to do everywhere. There is so much decline and closure and reduction of stipends. There is a zeitgeist in the community. Environmental issues are big, and we need to make that link between action on the climate and church growth. That's what seems to have been a success here, and it's taken 2 years so far. We'll see where the next year leads us. I'm not sure where we are time-wise, but I'll stop sharing. Sorry, that was all quite quick going through.
Thank you so much once again. I've just seen popping up in the chat a comment from Rob, basically saying that when I said it was inspiring, it definitely was. We don't have a lot of time for questions because I'm conscious we've got another session to get to, but bear in mind that you can ask questions through the Q&A part in your Hoover app. You can also visit the booth in the exhibitor space where you will have the opportunity to listen to some of that singing in one of the recordings, and it's well worth it. For the next few minutes, I just want to sort of throw it open, less for questions than for reactions, because I'm sure I'm not the only one who's been profoundly moved by what we've heard.
I just want to say thank you very much, Father Hugh. I absolutely found this the highlight of my day. What you've done there is inspiring, and it's given me a lot to think about, actually, for what we're doing outside our own church, where I am at the moment. We've got this lovely, huge, massive lawn, but there's a gate around it, and it's always locked. Yeah, there's just so much. It's just opened up so much in my imagination that we could be doing more of. So thank you.
Unlock and open is the biggest thing, and none of our churches here are locked at any hour of the day. And if people come in and end up kipping there because they're dossing out, great, they should be able to.
Okay. In which case, the only thing I have to say is prepare yourself for a number of people sneaking over the border to have a look at what's happening, actually to visit that amazingly beautiful place, and to offer profound thanks for giving up your time so generously today. I know there's been small groups, but the impact you've had is much, much greater than the sum of the parts. And we really look forward to sharing this on the YouTube feed after the event. It will be available to share and for others to see. So thank you so much.
By next year, we can't do champing because the C of E copyrighted that. So we'll be opening Llanbedr Llan. So if you do want to bring groups up, you'll be able to sleep out in one of the churches. We've also got a derelict pub that's been done up into pilgrimage accommodation. So hopefully by next year, if you want to come and spend the night up here, you'll be able to as well. And there's lots of things open on our website. We like faith tourism. So